Today's workshop or training is going to be talking about how we create sustainable and reciprocal community partnerships. And this is a topic that is something we've been hearing a lot about from both our campus and community partners. And for those of you who are on campus, you've probably heard about, or maybe have heard about, the community engaged course designation that our office launched this fall. And reciprocity and sustainability is a big component of our community engagement courses. So this is a topic that I think is sort of at the front and center of a lot of people's minds in terms of community engagement. This workshop is part of a broader workshop series that the Office of Community Engagement offers. And I would encourage all of you to visit our website, and I will drop in the chat here a link to see the different workshops that we have hosted as an office and to look at upcoming opportunities. But I would also encourage you to reach out to us if you have any questions or if you would have particular topics in mind of community engagement questions that you might have or potential issues that you might want to discuss. I would encourage you to reach out to us and we would be happy to consider doing a workshop around a particular issue that's important to you. So today we are going to be hearing from faculty who are committed to reciprocity and sustainability within their community partnerships. Travis Kraus is an associate professor in practice in the School of Planning and Public Affairs. And he's also the director of the Iowa Initiative for Sustainable Communities. And I see faces in the audience who I know have worked with the IISC before, but I'm sure Travis will tell you a little bit about the program as he's speaking. And Loyce Arthur is an associate professor in theater arts, and she is a longtime faculty member that's been involved in community engagement and has worked with our office for years and has worked with many community partners for years. And in addition, we're joined by Mark Brutner, who is also in theater arts. And Mark has a long history of community engagement as well. And in particular, what Travis and Loyce and Mark all have in common is that they taught an interdisciplinary community engagement course this past semester that I think they're going to use today as sort of a model and a basis for discussing best practices around sustainability and reciprocity within community engagement. And so for today's workshop, we're going to hear from Travis and Loyce, as well as Mark. They're going to give a presentation and discuss their course, as well as the best practices around reciprocity and sustainability within community engagement. And then we're going to open it up for a question and answer session with the audience. For the Q&A, I would encourage all of you to use the chat box. I will be checking that, as well as Noelle Mills, who is a graduate assistant with the Office of Community Engagement. We'll be checking that chat box and moderating that Q&A as it comes in. The other thing I'll note is that as the workshop is going on, if you have any questions or have any trouble, please just direct message either myself or Noelle Mills, and we'd be happy to help you. Like I said, we'll spend the first half to 3/4 of the workshop hearing from Travis and Loyce and from Mark, and then we'll have plenty of time for questions and answers with the audience. So with that, unless if anybody has anything right off the bat, I am really pleased to and thankful to have Travis Kraus and Loyce Arthur with us today, and they are going to kick us off. Travis and Loyce, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay. Good morning, everyone.
Sharing my screen, so hopefully you can see the presentation now that we have for you. Okay, cool. I can only see you and Loyce, Nick, so thanks for that thumbs up. Well, I guess just to quickly get us started, just another quick introduction. I'm in the School of Planning and Public Affairs, Associate Professor of Practice, and Associate Professor of Practice means that I came from the practitioner side, so I was working in economic development and community development prior coming to the University of Iowa. and stepping into a role with the Iowa Initiative for Sustainable Communities. So I've been here for about 6 years now doing that.
And I'm Loyce Arthur. I'm in the Department of Theater Arts. I'm a costume designer by profession, but about, I guess it's 10 years ago, almost at this point. I've been at the university for 22 years, but about 10 years ago, the Center for Teaching started an initiative in community engagement that was picked up by Teresa Magnum and the Obermann Center and connections to Imagining America. And then I met Nick and talking about engagement with an engagement project that I was doing since 2013, the Carnival Project, the community project. And there's been a lot of development along the way in terms of thinking about engagement with community, as well as how to formulate curriculum around that kind of work. So we want to start with sort of how we started collaborating. That would be Travis, Chuck Connerly, Mark Bruckner, and I on the course that we taught for the first time last spring. And so we'll be teaching it again this spring. So we're still in process in terms of figuring this all out. So this is by no means hard and fast, but we can share some of the things that we've encountered and how we approach them. It actually came out of the climate where we were with the shift that was going on in conversation about social justice and diversity, equity, and inclusion. And this was before 2020 that I started thinking about this class and the George Floyd murder and Breonna Taylor. And it was just, for a while, I had been thinking about wanting to do a course that was specifically aimed for artists who were involved in community engagement, because in attending Imagining America conferences, it became clear, I kept talking to artists and they kept going, oh, I wish I had known a bunch of things before I went into community engagement. So I had a working group with Obermann and we started to talk about this question and try to figure this all out. And so it wasn't until 2019 that I actually started to think about a course and what that would be. And then I happened to mention and I'm trying, which came first, the Mural Project or my conversation with Chuck Connerly? I think it was the beginning of thinking about the Mural Project, that we were going to do this mural on the parking ramp, but it was also attached to an economic space. And my question became, based on something that Chuck and I had talked about in the past, which was at the other end of the building, something that stuck with me. On the other end of the building, there had been some conflict around young people of color hanging out waiting for the bus. So on one end, you would have this mural talking about social justice, and on the other hand, you would have something happening that was also a social justice issue. And so what is that space in between? And that led to a conversation, well, how many Black businesses are there in downtown Iowa City? And so then we came up with this plan to put the two courses together, the planning class and the art class that I was thinking of. So then we would bring these students all together, art students and planners, to figure out essentially creative placemaking and what that means in particular. Travis, do you want to talk a little bit about creative placemaking from the planner point of view?
Yeah, definitely. So, and I should mention that Chuck Connerly is the now retired past director of the School of Planning and Public Affairs, and he had been teaching this class, community development, for a long time, and I was, I guess, kind of co-teaching it along with helping facilitate the community partnerships that we did through that class, the engagement projects. And we were moving toward in a direction where we were really thinking about the ways that culture kind of defines community. And then I think last semester we decided, just because there is this kind of infrastructure around creative placemaking, and it's important for urban planners to kind of understand that, that we wanted to make that the focus of the class. So we were already kind of moving in this direction, working in places like Columbus Junction and Macokota. And so the course kind of shifted more into this realm of creative placemaking, and which there are pros and cons around that word. So so we talk about that in our class, but really we were interested in the idea of how space reflects the values, or can reflect the values of a community, and how it can either include or exclude people within that community. And even more specifically, how do artists participate in a civic engagement, community development type of process? So so from a planning perspective, it's really important to understand how artists connect to that. And it made a lot of sense for us to work with Loyce in her class, who are artists, right? So so there was just a really exciting opportunity to merge these two courses together. And just to kind of add some, and explain a little bit, our students all met for some reason I could never get the day right, but we met Mondays and Wednesdays. And one of those days, all of our students were together in the same Zoom classroom. And then we met separately on the other day. So I think it was Monday, we were all together. Wednesday, we were separate, talking about our specific disciplines. But we agreed early on, prior to the students arriving, that we wanted to focus on this topic, and we developed this theme around the idea, so that with the question, how can arts and culture advance economic inclusion and support Black entrepreneurs in Iowa City? So my background in economic development, and my interest in the arts, also I volunteer for a local arts nonprofit called Public Space One. And so all of those things kind of converged into this this theme and this, I guess, objective of like, what does this look like, and how do we structure a class, and even how do we structure a project around that idea?
It was also sort of a serendipitous thing that was happening. So as we were developing the course, then the Mural Project was being developed, and one of the artists, Antoine Williams, because Dante Hayes and Anton Williams were a team of artists that conceptualized the idea for the mural. It was actually painted by Jill Wells and Marissa Hernandez, but those initial ideas were proposed by Anton and Dante. And Anton said very clearly in the development meetings that he was very much interested, and we all were, in this idea that the mural is not enough, that you can't just put up this visual symbolic representation and expect change, that something else has to be behind it. So then the outcomes, or our thought about how the course should also develop, was along those lines as well. So what is behind, if you have on one side the work that the artists are doing, what else is happening to move forward this idea of social justice, and have a sense of that? Again, not with a sense of trying to solve anything, other than to make sure that people's voices are heard within that community, and in very particular, that the Black community and Black entrepreneurs were heard in this process.
So as we worked with each other, Mark and Chuck and Loyce and I, on the development of the class, which felt like new territory for all of us. I think it's fair to say that. and we learned a lot along the way. We also started thinking about what does it mean to do a project around this theme. In the School of Planning and Public Affairs, engaged learning is a big piece of what we do. So, and that is what the Iowa Initiative for Sustainability, Sustainable Communities is all about as well. So IISC is actually a community engagement program. So we set up these projects with departments and communities across the state. So one thing that I think is very important. So this slide is kind of like the work that happens behind the scenes prior to students arriving and also after they arrive, is that you start to form those relationships, right? So for IISC, that means sometimes we're talking to potential community partners a year in advance, 6 months in advance, and thinking about like, how do we work together so that we can have some kind of mutually beneficial collaboration. So relationship building is an important piece. You can't do a community engagement project and find that partner a week before the course starts, right? Like there's a lot of developing relationships that happen along the way. And because it's in Iowa City and because Loyce and I are both residents of Iowa City, I think that we had some long established relationships here in our own community to start off with.
And I will say also that we had to form a partnership, since it was a team taught course, between each other, particularly since we were coming from different disciplines. So there had to be partnership conversations in terms of, particularly we'll talk a little bit more about this when we're talking about reciprocity, in terms of balancing the needs of both sets of partners in the course that we then could then also model and take through the course out into the community as we talked with people.
So one thing that was important to the way our course was structured, and I credit Loyce for bringing this resource to our class and our students, was that we used this this book here about engagement, and it is, as you can see here, the Student Companion to Community Engaged Learning. So it is about how to do engagement well from the student perspective and the reasons why this is an important part of their educational experience. And so some of these terms that you see here are derived from that book. Our students read chapters of the book, and it was how we set the stage for doing engagement well, right? Not just saying we have a project, but also trying to understand how to do this type of work well. And so one of the terms used in this, one of the terms used around community engagement, is this idea of imperatives. So it is imperative to act on something, right? So there's a need, and that's really what we're talking about when we think about imperatives. And so you identify a need, and for IISC, that's just a matter of asking communities what are their challenges and what are their opportunities, and having them as experts in their own community explain to us what their needs and opportunities are, rather than the University of Iowa showing up to a community partner and saying, here's what we think is going on, and here's our solution. And really it's really kind of derived from the community partner's perspective as experts about their own community. And then this other imperative is that there's an urgency to act. So as Loyce was mentioning, like, this project came out of broader social discussions around the protests and the activity around the George Floyd mural. So there's been an urgency to act for a long time, but that spark helped solidify that this was an important direction for our class to go. Is there anything else you want to say about imperatives, Loyce?
No, I don't think so. You're good.
So, and then the book also describes key dispositions. And so this is just the list of those terms that are in the book. And they're all, I think, probably words that you've heard before if you've been doing engaged learning type of work. And some of them are pretty self-explanatory. The idea of humility is, as I mentioned before, that we go to community partners, not necessarily considering ourselves the expert on the issue that they are closest to, right? So or having a solution. So we're there to learn from them just as much as we're there to provide assistance and for them to learn from us as well. The one of these things that was really important for me in particular as we developed our course was this idea of community cultural wealth. So what we didn't quite know exactly is who's working in this space already, right? So with the idea that you don't want to do any harm, right? We wanted to kind of get an understanding of who's working in this space, getting a lay of the land. And that led us to find additional partners for our project that we learned about even as the course was unfolding. And so a couple of examples of that are the Multicultural Development Center of Iowa, who, and that's a nonprofit organization that is working on STEM initiatives for youth. It's working on mentorship for business owners. And another one was a company, not a nonprofit, but a private company called I Heart Black Business. And they were, that company does a lot of work around networking, business networking among Black business owners in the Iowa City, Cedar Rapids corridor. So as we were trying to think about how do we plug ourselves into this project, it was really important for us to understand who's working in this space, what cultural wealth exists for us to connect to, and is it okay to connect with them at all, right? So that was really important step in our process, is engaging with those stakeholders to ensure that we were going to be offering something and not stepping on their toes or getting in the way. And I'm happy to report that they were they were enthusiastic collaborators with us.
So we want to pull Mark Bruckner into the conversation at this point to talk a little bit about the intersectionality and the social identity wheel, because that became something very important. What we wanted to, the way we structured the course was, the beginning was sort of preparing the students to do the work. So we went through a series of things with this text, which actually Nick Benson introduced me to. In terms of just making them aware that it's not something you go into cold. You need to be prepared, the things you need to think about. So Mark?
Do you want me to share my screen or just talk in general about this? I can hold on, I will.
Just talk in general, because we want to make sure there's time for people to ask some questions. And then if anybody's interested, sure Mark is willing to send that.
Yeah, I'm going to unshare. So the social identity wheel is a practice, and I can send, if anybody needs, I have a short PowerPoint related to that and can send resources about that. It's an exercise that I actually do in my arts and performance class, which is a class taught cross-listed across all of theater, dance, and the division of performing arts. And it's a general education class that brings students in to look specifically, their text being arts in performance. So musical theater, or music, theater, dance, etc. And one of the issues I talk about is that we're coming together as a community, experiencing art, and so we are individuals, but when we come together as as a community, we intersect with other people. And it's important kind of at the beginning to understand who we are as we experience art, because art has the potential to transform us. Either in permanent art installations, such as the Oracles of Iowa, or art that's transient, such as the recent Our Lady of 121st Street. So hopefully we're transformed by that experience and by experiencing with other people who are not, who some are like us and some are different. So it's an exercise that we do. There's two parts of it. One is the personal identity wheel, and that essentially asks students to look at things like, oh, what are their hobbies? What is their favorite book? What, but also, where did you fall, if at all, in terms of if you come from a large family or a small family, favorite music, things like that. So that students do that work kind of just to look at who they are as an individual, and they share that out with others in the class. And just to kind of talk, to begin a conversation about their own, what they think is their personal identity around some things we think of as markers of identity. Then after that exercise, they move into the social identity wheel, which looks at, in the social identity wheel, there are identities around race, ethnicity, language, gender, country of origin, economic background, religion. And what students are asked to do with respect to that is to kind of rank where a particular social identity, what they are is most salient to them at this given moment in time. And what identities did they think about the most? What identities did they think about the least? And then also, what identities do they think other people, when they see them, do they think about? You know, do they assign to them? And students go around this wheel and rank these different identities, and then they have a dialogue specifically about that. And it's always really quite fascinating to me in this in that exercise how lively people get. And recently, I've come to find out that students are more comfortable talking about certain things that years ago, many of us may not have been comfortable talking about, for example, sexuality and race, but they're less comfortable doing the identity wheel, which is pretty funny. You know, like, oh, I'm less comfortable sharing what my favorite book is than I am talking about these other issues. But the exercise really is a way of building that community, building understanding across difference and celebrating difference, and coming to some kind of common understanding of our humanity, right? So I'll turn, but that's a practice. I think it's a really great way to build community in any kind of classroom setting, and so I'll turn it back over to Travis and Loyce.
Thanks, Mark.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we spent 5 weeks on this. So we took 5 weeks of time to think about this. And for the class next semester, we're going to be making use of the modules created by the Office of Engagement so that students can engage in some of this work outside of class and then just bring their attention into class so that we can sort of make that connection more closely right into what they need to do. Bias, I think we were up to on that slide, Travis.
Right, yep.
So the only thing I'll say about bias, because Mark touched on this, was that we want students to be aware of any biases that they have or ones that they might encounter before you go into a community, to avoid a savior complex or thinking of yourself as a savior walking into a community.
And we have about 4 more slides, so we might have to, even just to get to the Q&A, pick up the pace for our slides. We could probably talk for like 2 hours, but
yeah, we're happy to answer any other questions.
The project management piece here is just, you know, from my perspective, doing a lot of engagement work, is that somebody has to kind of have an idea. I mean, we did not start the semester knowing where we would end up, but we did start the semester kind of having a direction. One of the things that connects to this idea of imperatives was that I've been part of a community group with Chamber and Economic Development, people from the university and the city and others, and it was called the BIPOC Business Education and Resources Group. And what was kind of striking to me was that there was a group for businesses that were owned or managed by people of color, and there was only one BIPOC business owner in the group. So it really seemed imperative to me to bring additional perspectives to that group. So our project connected to that, and we decided that what we would do is something that Chuck Connerly and I have been doing for a number of years, which was storytelling around this idea of like around this heart and soul framework. And I won't get into the detail about that, but storytelling as a way to imagine a vision for the future, right? So if you talk to people, you discover what their shared values are, and common themes emerge that point you in directions about what types of things you might envision for the future. So we kind of knew that, and then we had our basic project management kind of mapped out when the class started.
Although it evolved over time. Travis, you're going to need to stop sharing and get to the right slide again in the presentation, because we're looking at the whole view rather than the.
Gotcha. Okay.
And so I think we're going to jump over our next slide, which is the Mural Board, that some of you might be familiar with the software, but we just had a series of ways in which we could have the students really participate in part of the planning, project planning, and answering some questions and thinking about all of the imperatives and dispositions. And so that became a tool for us to help to sort of shape where there might be directions where we had to pivot a little bit, or how we had to move around within this.
Yeah.
So getting to reciprocity, or
yeah, no, I was just going to say it was just an interesting, if we think about reflection, I feel like this was kind of a pre-reflection before we actually began the project, which involved the students conducting the storytelling interviews. Let's see. Okay, reciprocity. We got to one of the terms of the workshop. So I think it's probably important just to kind of talk a little bit about how this word functions. And for me, I think it is about identifying shared goals and identifying mutual benefit, right? So for our students, I think it's obvious to those of us to do that there's a really unique learning opportunity when you get to do a real world project, right? So it's kind of this enhanced educational experience that gets them outside of a classroom or a hypothetical exercise and gets them to do something that really impacts the lives of people in our community. For partners, reciprocity means that it can't be just about students or the university deriving the benefit, right? So, and for nonprofits and partners in the community, sometimes it may feel like they're being asked to do a lot and they don't necessarily always see value in the end. So it's really important to actually have those discussions early on. And one easy way, I think, to know if there is benefit flowing toward your community partner is that they tell you that there is, right? Like, so if they believe that there's that they're getting something out of it, then I think you can say pretty confidently that you are oh, thanks, Frank, for that question. That you are providing some value to that community partner. And for us, because we didn't know where we would end up with the projects, in the end, the process also seemed like that there was benefit flowing both directions as well. So bringing people together to have conversations, even though we didn't know what the outcome was. The word that we use in our department is deliverable, which not everybody loves, but we didn't know where we would end up, but the process itself also produced some value.
And deliverable actually became a question we had to talk through, because as an artist, one does not necessarily want to think about deliverables. Sounds a little bit too corporate and product based, but I think we sort of both had to come to an understanding about that before we also talked with our partners. And we did offer monetary compensation to our direct partners, those that were involved in the story map project that we'll show you briefly in a second. But we had conversations with those partners, as Travis said, ahead of time, before the class started, while the course was going along, The students became part of that. I think it's really important when you're talking about engagement to be very specific that engagement is about reciprocity and is about partnerships and equal and that sense of shared goals and mutual benefit. That's really critically important because engagement has come to sort of mean outreach or volunteerism, and there are lots of different ways in which one can engage. But if you're talking about the kind of engagement in which you are seeking this reciprocity, then you have to really, really concentrate and think about that and continually check in on that particular process and think about that really deeply. I think it's really critically important. It also then means from the beginning, you start thinking about sustainability because that building of partnerships is not something that should be thought of as 1 semester long or 1 month long. The project should be sustainable in order to have a real impact on the community. And so that reciprocity is something that is continuous, even if your classes change over time. You know, you have a new set of students. The overall goals have to be one of reciprocity and sustainability.
And I'll move on to the next slide, but there's just one more piece from this list that I think is important to mention, and that is this idea of roles and responsibilities, and especially what that means for community partners. And for engagement projects at IISC, we often identify somebody that we would consider a project lead. So that's the person that the students contact to just kind of work through the process and the project and be connected to resources. And I think it's important to let those people know that they have a responsibility to live up to their end of the bargain as well, and also that they are contributing to the education of the students that are taking the class. And I saw that we do have a community partner that we worked with in the past for Manning, Iowa, Hiron, that served in that role and did a great job doing that. So let's see if I can advance this slide. What is going on here? There we go. So our project, in the end, students talked about they talked about the way that Iowa City kind of is arranged by class and race in many ways, right? So that Iowa City, as progressive as we are, does have some challenges around the idea of equity. And so somebody talked about Iowa City as being as kind of being a map, one of the students in our class. And from a planning perspective, we do a lot of mapping, right? So that led us to pointed us in a direction of something called a story map. And hopefully you've seen it. We developed a story map that includes a business directory of Black-owned businesses in the Iowa City area, plus some from Cedar Rapids. That had existed in the past from Iowa City Area Development Group, but not in the way that we were able to do it. This story map tells the story of the participants that were interviewed by our students and includes photos. We were very fortunate to have a student in our class or a participant in our class that is also a local artist and professional photographer, Miriam Alicorn. Loyce, can you let us know what her name is?
Miriam Alicon. Oh no, I'm blanking on her last name. I'm sorry.
Sorry.
Yes. She just did the wonderful project in Weatherby Park with the Day of the Dead Arfende, which was an amazing community project. So she was one of our students, non-traditional students in the course, and she has said that based on what came up for her in the course and her thinking, she came up with this project. So that was kind of a great success story that we have.
I didn't know about that.
But she was also, she was also a photographer. So she is a photographer, and so she took the images, which is also tied to, I think, sort of the art part of this was that, this directory existed, But those of us on the art side of things were trying to think of that creative part of placemaking, which meant to hear from the voices of people. So what is that, to hear people's voices, to hear their stories, to focus on the humans behind the businesses. And so that led to collecting stories from these individuals that are then connected to the map. So you can put a face, you can put a history, you can put a whole sense of how they feel in community, and the community building that they're doing, both with their presence and with their business, those two things coming together. So that was it happened to be one of the ways that we decided to put together our creative placemaking thinking around this project.
So I've just put a link to Miriam's site and a link to the story map in the chat box.
Yes, thanks.
And there's a QR code there. So yeah, so let's keep moving on. So our last slide is about sustainability, and of course, one thing that to avoid is that you don't begin a project that you can't see through, at least the part that you're expected to deliver, right? So it's really important that if you begin working with a community partner, that you live up to your end of the bargain and see that piece through. So this idea of commitment to the project can sometimes, and did in this project, extend beyond the class. So by the end of the semester, we weren't quite there with our project, and that meant that there had to be some commitment to seeing it through over the period of the summer. And I'm happy to say that we were able to continue to work with students, to work with community partners, and even identify additional resources to finish the story map project over the summer. So it wasn't just an engagement project just tied to the class. It was a project that we all agreed needed to be done, and it got done even after the class finished, in large part to the work that our students did, right? And so just a couple of other things around this idea of sustainability is quality control. So from it at the Iowa Initiative for Sustainable Communities, we want to meet or exceed our community partners' expectations, and that means for me not giving them work that I know to be inaccurate. So like there's a process for just making sure that we're putting our best foot forward, and that the faculty involved in that project give it their stamp of approval and do the work that's needed to get the project done. That can mean, sometimes it can mean like there's a staff person, and that's what how I see my role with IISC is maintaining that level of quality and meeting the expectations of partners. If that doesn't exist, then probably the faculty member that formed that partnership needs to fill that role. Sustainability means that you have an idea about what happens when that handoff occurs, right? And if it's a nonprofit organization, we can't burden them with a lot of work that they don't have the capacity to do themselves. And so that's a conversation that you have to have early on. For us, we're part of this community, and so if somebody needs to have something changed on the story map, or businesses want to be added, which has happened many times, I'm the person that gets the email, and I'll make the changes myself, just because somebody needs to do it, and the handoff hasn't happened yet to somebody else, and I'm happy to keep doing that role. We have lots of interviews, so thinking about like how do you preserve these things is important, and something that I think we're still trying to figure out. We have many hours of Black business owners talking and Black community leaders talking about their stories, and we pulled audio clips out of those things, but we have a large repository of those things, and now we need to think about how do we archive those and preserve those. Keeping up relationships, and then of course reflecting and assessing is part of continuing to think about how to ensure that the project is sustainable.
So I don't think I have anything more to add. I think we should open it up and see if there's some questions or any kind of discussion that we want to with our remaining time.
Thank you, Travis and Loyce. And Mark, that was fantastic. I think we could start with Frank's question that he put in the chat box, which I think goes sort of to this question of sustainability and reciprocity, which is how do we assess our projects to ensure that they met the needs of both ourselves and our campus and our community partners. So does that look like, and we've talked a lot about this before, I know, does that look like behaviors changed? Is it, did we see change in the community partner themselves? Did we see change in ourselves? Or is it the process itself that was a value added for the partnership? So could you guys talk a little bit about how you see that with this project specifically?
I think we do have an advantage in being able to teach the class again so that some of these questions are going to come up, what the results are helping to shape the way we do the class again. We want to continue the story map, but also think about some other ways for artists and planners to work in community at the same time. I think we did notice that sort of on the way, because we purposely chose to not set up the whole project and then implement it in the class and just sort of plug the students in. We wanted them to be part of that process. That meant we ended up late to their actual work on the story map itself, which led to Travis having to do a lion's share in order to get the map ready. Because one of the things that we had mentioned to our partners was that they would take part in the Summer of the Arts organization's Iowa Soul and Blues Festival, in an event where it was for Black business and entrepreneurs to come together to talk with one another. And so we wanted the map ready for that event. We invited some of those partners to be part of that organization and that event. And we thank you, Andrea Truitt, for helping to make that happen. Along with, so what happened in that event was that some of the community partners that we had been working with met other Black business partners and then were able to do their own kind of activities as part of that. So we could actually see that happening just in terms of as an outcome of the fact that we brought these people together and it led to this sort of thing.
One other, I'm sure these three words were selected during the course of the class and students with student contributions, but that we had kind of a tagline for the story map, and it said educate, donate, support. And it's really hard to kind of measure all of the impacts, right? But if people become more educated about the businesses that exist, and we have and Candace Smith from I Heart Black Business essentially formed her business around this idea that she did not know as a student here herself that there were Black entrepreneurs in Iowa City, and we heard that from students in our class as well. So people are becoming educated about it. It was important for us to talk about the nonprofits that are helping support these businesses as well. So I don't think we've followed up about this, but donations flowing into those businesses would be great to hear about, and then supporting businesses. And I do think that there are anecdotes about upticks in support of Black-owned businesses when these things are shared on social media. And I think that the businesses themselves see an increase in activity. So, I mean, more businesses, right? An increase in their their businesses. So maybe that if their sales go up, that's something that, is a positive outcome out of it all too.
We also, Travis mentioned donations. We included social service businesses as well as traditional businesses.
We have a question in the chat from Holly about the social wheel exercise that you guys did. And she asks, what does that resistance look like from students? And was there something lost as a result of that resistance? And I would just sort of add, I'm curious as to how that exercise contributes to potentially sort of the reciprocity and sustainability piece, because it's allowing students to be able to better understand how they can play an agent of change role within the project. So I don't know, Mark, if you want to speak to that.
Yeah, and resistance is probably a strong word. It's probably more hesitance, or hesitancy in sharing things about their personal identity. That could be favorite foods, hobbies, where they are in the order of birth order in their family, and things like that. And they just felt more comfortable talking about some of these social identity categories. And to me, that's an encouraging sign, actually. And it wasn't as if when they're doing the personal identity wheel, if you just took the barometer of the room by the volume, then it was, although we were on Zoom, but recently doing it, they're engaged, but, and talking, and there's a lot of laughter and so forth. But then when they go over into the social identity wheel, there's still that sort of hum and that buzz if you just close your eyes and listen to it. But they're really thoughtful and not resistant to that. And I think that where that ties into the idea of reciprocity, and also just understanding when you're going out there, particularly when they're going out to interview people, having an understanding of who they are and who they may be interviewing, that was really important, and I think one of the things we looked at in the student engaged learning, the companion to student engaged learning, was the idea of asset-based engagement. Really looking at a community from the point of view of the strengths that they have, rather than a sense of deficits, which there can be a tendency to do. So.
Yeah, it was interesting when we asked people whether they'd be comfortable doing the interviews, and some of them at the beginning, they were all kind of, oh no, I'm not going to feel comfortable doing that. And they had all of these particular reasons. But as they got into it, they all kind of came through, and we really stressed, and this is something I think that came out of the exercise that Mark is talking about, that, find some kind of a common ground. So you can start talking about anything, some kind of shared mutual interest that you might have with this person who's in front of you. And there can be an age difference, and so that can also be part of what's happening for the students. But just have a sort of a conversation, and the students really responded to that idea of having a conversation and not having too many questions that they needed answers to, allowing the person to talk as long as they were willing to share whatever time they wanted to talk. We had some points that we wanted to kind of gear them towards. Specifically, we wanted to know, what do you know now that you wish you had known when you were first starting out? And we wanted those questions to be really neutral, not, we didn't want to ask them, what challenges do you have as a Black person in Iowa City? That wasn't the point. The point was to really hear their stories. And so by taking it in a conversational way and putting themselves in that place in terms of how they asked the question, how they engaged, I think made it easier for them.
I think we have time for one more question, and we do have one more question in the chat. And this is about if you guys could recommend best practices for dealing with egos that are in these projects, and maybe sort of are steamrolling other partners' input, or resisting alternative points of view. And it sounds like you guys were structuring your class to try to encourage, more equitable dialogue. But can you address this question?
I'll try, and maybe there are people on the call that I'm happy to say that I got to work with really fantastic people. So I didn't experience that in this particular project. But one of the things that, and I think this is kind of connected to this question, there's a couple of things. And one is, you know, depending on how you're structuring these conversations, there's this idea of stepping up and stepping back and rules of engagement. So kind of setting the rules about like how you make space for people to provide input from the very beginning, and just laying that out there. And from a planning perspective and doing a lot of public engagement stuff, like sometimes we just lead meetings off having a conversation about those things. There's kind of a list that you could use, but you can also have a discussion about those things, so that you, from the very beginning of the project, you talk about not steamrolling over other people, right? So so you can do something like that. The other thing that really sticks out for me from this project in particular was said by Tracy John Sargent, who's the executive director of the Multicultural Development Center and was really a key collaborator for us. He talked about the people closest to the issue or closest to the solution. And so if somebody has an ego but not the right perspective, then I think you need to talk to the people that are closest to the issue, right? So so there's this idea of humility, and I think that's probably another word that connects to this question, and that is that we don't have the answers or the solutions. It's about the collaboration and the co-creation that happens along the way.
Well, I think that is a very wonderful sentiment to end today's workshop on. I want to thank Travis and Loyce and Mark for being a part of this workshop. I want to thank all of you for attending this workshop. I will tell you that we have recorded this workshop and there will be a transcript, and this workshop will be sliding right onto the Office of Community Engagement's website for you to view at your leisure in the future. And I hope all of you have been able to sort of take away some best practices around some of these sort of key issues within engagement, in terms of ensuring that, particularly within our community engaged learning classes, that we're setting up structures in a way, our classes in a way in which our community partners and our students see both benefit and sustainability out of the work that they do. And I think that can lead us really towards those benefits that Frank was talking about or asking about today in the chat. So thank you all so much for being here today. Thank you again to Travis, Loyce, and Mark. Really appreciate your time. And I look forward to seeing you all again soon at our next workshop. Take care.